I have a really good opener for this one.
Ooh, I like that.
So, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on in. The water's fine. Get sucked in by the Triptide. 3, 2, 1. Hey.
Alrighty, I guess Shauna opened this episode for all of you out there with I have a really good opener. He really built my expectations up. So I'm glad he delivered.
Welcome to episode 3 now of Triptide, the show nobody asked for. We're back.
We're just going to keep going. You can ask us to stop all you want. It's not happening.
We are here to stay.
One thing I did want to say, so basically on the end of the last episode, our comment challenge was things to talk about. We're recording this on a Sunday, meaning we posted that episode yesterday. Now, the real issue is there's no comments, but we are going to wait till week 4 to go over any comments left, just so there's a bit of time there to explain why we're not following up. We'll leave that for week 4.
We do appreciate all comments. All input is welcome, unless your name rhymes with Shmon McGee. Then your input is absolutely not welcome.
We don't want to call anybody out. People whose names rhyme with Shmon McGee have an historical past of leaving crappy comments.
Yes.
If you're listening to this podcast, don't. One of our 7 fans, get out of here.
We don't need you. We don't need your views. We don't need your likes. Unsubscribe. The old Triptide, the only podcast that tells you to unsubscribe.
You can still donate, but
yeah, please,
the rest
please. We do need your money for food.
We are both starving. I would like to let you know. So we are in Area 51, our recording booth right now. You may hear some background noise just because the guards are watching a movie, I believe. So if you do, that's why. Just a quick explanation. Makes perfect sense. Something I wanted to jump into. One thing that we haven't discussed much yet is the world changing during coronavirus. Now, what's weird to me, we started this podcast in coronavirus, deep in it. It's no longer
We both
topical.
had it at the time that we started.
We took a trip from China. Things didn't go so well. But
just kidding.
What's interesting is I've been thinking about how I want to be doing this for a while. So say a year from now, people are going to listen back, and they won't even know this is during Corona unless they look at the date. And maybe we've mentioned it before, but it'll just seem like a normal recording. And we both have been, socially distanced or whatever, and I've had him over, and we've been lucky enough to not have to worry about doing like a Zoom recording. Which
We're both in our social bubbles, I think it's fair to say.
And it's interesting just because looking at pandemics, if you were to try to make a podcast during any pandemic except pretty much this one, it wouldn't work. I think as awful as Corona is, we're just historically at a place where we have enough medical ability and enough social distancing ability, and you can instantly send out a message. It's not like the newspaper comes in and it tells you already have the plague and you're going to die in a week. Like, we're at such a level where this pandemic sucks, but it's also sucking way less than all pandemics have ever sucked.
We're basically going on easy mode out here. It is interesting that this I haven't done enough pandemic history research, but from my limited knowledge, it's crazy that this virus does seem to be so infectious, yet has a 99% survival rate. And of course that rate changes depending on your age. That's just a very large average. And that's not to put down the lives that have been lost due to this pandemic. That's not my point. It's just interesting that we're going through a world-altering event, but essentially on easy mode, where it's not the zombie apocalypse. It's not, the survival rate is high enough where society isn't altered that much. I mean, we do have now Zoom University, essentially, businesses are just not using office spaces anymore. So commercial real estate has changed entirely, which is crazy to think about. It's just this pandemic is definitely very unique, extremely.
What I find crazy is I obviously wouldn't wish a pandemic on anyone just because I know there are going to be people who have personally struggled with coronavirus in a serious way, and I don't want to make your struggle seem less real because everyone goes through things in life, and I think a lot of times you're worried to make your own struggle real because there's always something worse going on.
Mm-hmm.
And you always want to play things down.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that is big enough that it would be harmful to play down. Just to cover my explanation. But I do want to say, I find it interesting how before this pandemic occurred, I looked at the population and I said, eventually, we're going to need something to control it. And obviously, we're not living in this extreme overpopulation. But human life is on...
In the United States.
In the United States, that's true.
Yeah.
Human race is on a clock, and it's either we're going to find a way to kill ourselves, either environmentally or with bombs, or we're going to overpopulate and start dying out. These are the two main issues. We kill ourselves, or there's too many of us,
Very
and
positive
we don't have
thinking.
resources. And I like to be an optimist, as we say, but... What I find interesting is I've often considered, you watch movies and read books with similar themes, but the government could very easily start killing people in a way that's secretive to control population. And I feel like this is almost more of a dystopian concept that happens when we're more overpopulated. And obviously I don't want to be the one dying, but how would you stop them? Because if you were to stop the government from killing people, you'd be playing into overpopulation, and there would still be people suffering and starving to death. So eventually you do reach this balance on the scale where either you have to kill people or you have to protect their lives so they can starve and die. And it's kind of like the purge if we had twice as many people. And the homeless problem was big enough that they were all just starving and we didn't have the physical resources. I think today we have the resources for most of the people. We just don't distribute them, which is why it would be abhorrent to kill people for the sake of getting rid of them. But I do wonder, in the future, when there's pandemics, if they are becoming less violent and less threatening and less life-ending, are we going to have to substitute? Are we going to have to try to delay the medical aid for the sake that we want people to die? And like the Black Death, think about it. We weren't overpopulated, and a lot of people died. Less people are dying now, and we have a higher population. So I just wonder if eventually will we hit a pandemic where we're controlling that pandemic as kind of a natural selection just because there's too many people on the earth. Or there's also the possibility we all just die before we get to that point from some, global crisis that occurs that I can't foresee.
Well, I think there's a bunch of conspiracy theories about disease. Not that we're a conspiracy podcast.
Yet.
Yeah. I think, well, you've heard the one about cancer, that they supposedly have the cure for cancer. They being whoever, yeah, exactly. Whoever them is.
The Pluto police.
Yeah, the PP. The PP has the cure for cancer, but big pharma, makes so much money, they never release the cure for cancer. All the cancers, by the way,
It's a multi-cure.
And population control, there's a million conspiracies about all this nonsense. For the government to kind of be controlling it, though, I see that as impossible. And I don't believe that the government has all these cures for diseases.
I don't think they have them now, but I do see it very possible in the future because there's already such a split between who has power and how many people are in a country.
But it's like faking the moon landing, I would argue, because have you seen the statistic of for them to have faked the moon landing, X amount of people would have had to keep this secret, and from like psychological studies, that number of people can't keep a secret. I think I don't. There is a name to that study. There is a theory that disproves the fake moon landing conspiracy, but I think that would be in play with the government trying to control a pandemic.
So here's what I find interesting. Something like Holocaust deniers, we say they're crazy. I have had absolutely zero personal evidence of the Holocaust, yet I know it's real. I feel it would be crazy to say it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is at a time where they were like, oh, here's this awful thing happening, and they could take pictures.
Yeah.
And a lot of history, as you go farther back, it gets more obscure because they say, here's what we think happened, but it's harder to keep records, right? So we hit, it's almost an uncanny valley we're reaching, where we've been going up in terms of evidence and ability to record things, making it easier to prove phenomenons happened. And all the people who watched the moon landing on TV, that was evidence to them. This is happening. Yeah. There's no way you could ever refute that. Now, we're reaching a place where you could fake a moon landing and doctor a video, and if you gave it to those people back then, they would also think it's true because the technology didn't exist. Yeah. We have the technology. I saw, it's a video, these guys dress up as, quote, Justin Bieber, and they have him eat a burrito sideways. And I saw this on the news one time, just making fun of Justin Bieber, or I saw it on social media or something, and I was like, didn't think about it. Maybe like a year later, I don't know how long it was, I found out it wasn't Justin Bieber. News picked it up and said Justin Bieber eats his burrito sideways. What a wacko. It wasn't him. It was people trying to get a fake Justin Bieber picture famous.
It's called deep faking.
Exactly. And that wasn't even deep faking. That was just them dressing up as Justin Bieber.
Oh.
And then
they went old school.
Yeah. And and now we have deep fakes where you can make, and like in 20 years, though, deep fakes, you're not going to be able to tell, I worry, if it's a deep fake or if it's real.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the better our faking technology gets, the psychos out there who are like, oh, well, this didn't happen despite all the evidence, are going to start becoming more realistic because it's going to be easier to fake all of that evidence. Yeah. And if you convince one generation with fake evidence, then the next generation is going to be implanted in them that it's fact. Yeah. There's no way it could be wrong. Mm-hmm. So I do hope we don't reach an era where you can doctor information so much that the government could do something like hide medicine because they'd be like, oh, well, we found this cure, and they've already had it the whole time. They could doctor all of the evidence they need to find it because they already have it, and now we're able to fake so much evidence. People would just believe them, be like, oh, it's a good thing they discovered this, even if they've had it for 100 years. And it is just how will technology shape our future, I think, is a big part of that discussion.
It is ironic that in the age of information is almost harder to find. The true information is harder to find and pick from when you have all the information on the internet, whether it be fake or true. So that is something to think about. I think with deepfakes, I've learned a little bit about deepfakes from Corridor Digital on YouTube because they did a deepfake of Tupac in a music video with Snoop. And I think this was a few years ago. But they've talked about deepfakes. Highly recommend that information. I think that you will see the government like outlawing this technology because, as you said, in 20 years, the visual effects and the technology that can go into creating a deepfake. I mean, there's already realistic deepfakes that I can't discern from. Like, you need to work in visual effects. You need to have that artistic eye to be like, oh, that's fake. But that's such a small percentage of people. Like, I think you will see some of this technology start to be banned. And the libertarian in me goes, oh, no, don't do that. But I don't know, just being logical is like, okay, maybe that's not the worst thing to do.
That scares me, though, because I have such a lack of true trust for my government. And maybe that's unfair of me. But I see it as people who are old a lot of the times you can show them fake videos that young people can discern as fake or fake images, and old people are like, whoa, like I didn't know that was true. Or they'll just read news on Facebook and they'll be like, whoa, I can't believe Kanye West is the president. Well, guess, it happened. Like they don't understand that there's fake information presented factually now.
Yeah.
And
Well, not all. You can't just lob them all into one.
no, not all old people, but there are a generation that suffers more than our generation because they're not growing up with this technology.
Yes.
So what worries me is if you ban deepfakes, then you're giving the government this technology that people aren't going to see. So the only place they'll see it is the government if it's used. And at that point, when the government deepfakes something, there's going to be somebody who's like, I'm a visual effects expert. That's not real. And everyone's going to be like, you're just some crackpot. Why would they fake this video? Because they're not going to see how easy it is in their everyday life like we do. The generation after us, if they grow up with deepfakes banned, the government could use it to fool them easier because they don't expect deepfakes to be a thing.
They wouldn't even understand. Like, they might outlaw even being educated on such a technology. And that is scary. I think it's always important to question anyone and everything. Whether it be political or even scientific, just having that scientific mindset towards everything, I think is definitely a positive. So, but I think, I don't know, I'm really torn on deep fakes because you're right. It is, I mean, with great power comes great responsibility. Hashtag Spider-Man. I think, I don't know what to think because it is scary that the line between truth and fake news is becoming so blurred. And you shouldn't have to do work to figure out what the truth is. Like, I feel like, I don't know, that's how I feel. You shouldn't have to do all this research to figure out if we've been to the freaking moon or not. Because why can't we just have gone to the moon? What is the point of faking it? What's the point of fake news?
Here's the thing. The point of faking the moon landing is so we look good to Russia. And obviously, it's at an era where it seems implausible they could put in all of the effort to actually fake it.
Yeah, there was no visual effects.
And you can't call it impossible just because you have that understanding there is a chance it all happens. This whatever probability, 0.001, they pull it off, exist. But it's implausible to a degree where you don't believe it, and that's what matters. The general understanding of something, the general belief, almost makes something real. So for all our book club readers out there, 1984 is this classic book.
George
I recommend
Orwell.
to all of you. George Orwell was enlightened.
Yeah.
It really, if you like the book while you're reading it, it'll change the way you view things because it does just force you to say, if the entire world believed something, it's essentially true.
Yeah.
And if 80% of the world believes something, it's still essentially true. And if you grow up in a society that tells you something is true or something happened or something is factual, you're going to consider it true because that's how your brain works.
That's essentially racism in America. Like, people were just raised to think one race is superior to the other, and that happened through generations, hundreds of years in the United States, and happening still in the United States and other places. But if you just think about it, it's not, there's no way. Like, it's all flawed thinking, but they perceive it to be true.
And that leads me to two things. One, it's scary because something like racism, at least you can see this person is sad being a slave, and some empathy inside of you denies it to the point where there's going to be a progressive change, I think, and it's going to minimize racism because it's hard to perpetuate something that feels wrong. And the founding fathers...
Interesting.
Yeah,
You think it inherently felt wrong? I feel like slave owners in the 1800s, like, I don't know, man. There was a piece of them, that empathy, just from history books. It just felt to me like they never had that. They were, like, raised to lose that part of their humanity.
So I think historically, if you look at the Greeks, there's no empathy. The Spartans were like, we have these slaves, and if we want to kill them, we do, so that way we're better soldiers, and we get used to just murder all the time. I think there's a lack of empathy, but it's developed over time, and maybe the development of religion does enforce morality to a degree that causes this change, where people as a whole start to develop more moral desires. But whatever it is that creates this desire for morality, and obviously morality is very subjective and no one religion or one group knows what it is, but just the desire to be good. I think empathizing with somebody develops at least by the time of the Founding Fathers. And what I want to ask you about, and then I'll give some information I've learned from class, do you think the Northern Founding Fathers are racist because they owned slaves and they didn't work to get rid of slavery despite being against it and just being held hostage by the Southern states? Do you think it makes them racist, or do you think they're subject of the time?
Yeah, this is a tough debate. This is the one. Welcome to episode 3. We will lose any chance of having viewers.
Pepsi, if you'd like to sponsor us.
Okay, here's my take on it. I think that the Founding Fathers were racist. And I define racism as thinking one race is superior to the other. And how they led that mindset and had slaves, yeah, I would consider that racist. I mean, the small argument to like George Washington is like, oh, he freed his slaves when he died, I think. But I think the actual wording was like when his wife died. So she outlived him like another 10 or 15 years, if I remember correctly. So like, didn't do that much for that group of slaves. So yes, I do think that they were racist. I know Thomas Jefferson he was the most racist person in history almost. But the American in me, their racism, it is easy to be like, that was just them in the time. And I think to some extent that is true. That was their social norm. It was bad, but within that, they were able to create great things. And I feel like their achievements do outweigh their bigotry. Now,
some of them, of course.
Yes. And now, of course, I'm going to be biased. I'm a white male, they're white males too. So like, maybe I'm idolizing them. Maybe I'm inherently biased
of their achievements rather than their faults.
Yes, and that is true, and I recognize that. But to say that George Washington was an idiot, to say that he was useless to the history of the United States, I think that is insane. I think this country would not have even been able to start. We wouldn't have been able to come as far as we have without some of these men in history. So, for me personally, I do put their achievements before their failures, but I acknowledge their failures as human beings, and I think it's something never to forget. But I also think tearing down a statue of George Washington is ridiculous. I think a better thing to do would be to like literally put an asterisk next to his name every time. Like if the statue of Thomas Jefferson and the Jefferson Memorial, there should be someone else, an African American, in his memorial and be like, here's Thomas Jefferson. He was a great writer, but he was a bigot, and this person, I don't know exact names, but this person reminds us that even though he was a great writer, he still had, I'm going to use the word imperfections, very broadly, very lightly. I think there are ways to show history better than erasing it, and I think the trend right now is to erase history, and I don't like that.
I love being a history major because you do get a lot of extra information. So one view I have is I love Greek, especially in Roman studies. Now, a character like Odysseus, I talked about how amazing he is on the last episode.
Mm.
You would never say, oh, I can't believe Odysseus had slaves, because obviously he did. He wasn't even monogamous. He just had sex with women he captured from towns they conquered. That is the Greek culture. And understanding that, you're like, of course they're all terrible people. Morality hasn't developed enough yet for anyone to consider it was wrong. Odysseus is a good guy because he loves his wife, and even though he's offered the chance to become a god, he says, no, I just want to go home and get back to my wife. He's this really loving husband and father, but he still sleeps with other women who he conquers from war towns, and he still kills the slaves that aren't faithful to him while he's away because they think he's dead, and does these things that are modernly morally questionable. And I think people forget that evolution on a more recent scale, because that evolution happened between the Founding Fathers and us. But what's harder is not only is it more recent, so there's more expectation they're better, but it more directly affects us now. Odysseus's actions affect our culture because we like reading Greek stories.
Mm-hmm.
The Founding Fathers' actions affect us because it is literally the country created itself based on their actions. So what I find interesting is it was almost like they didn't weigh their options well. I think the North, so I learned about the first conventional Congress, I think it is. That might be what it's called. It's either that or like the Constitutional Congress. I always get them wrong.
That sounds more familiar.
But all these guys come and they're like, all right, what are we going to do with the country? And James Madison, I think, says he's so elated that the Founding Fathers didn't spend the whole time talking about slavery because they would have gotten nothing done. He's like, if we had tried to fight on slavery, we would have wasted the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
So what they end up doing, and they're hidden. This is all of your electors. No one's there but them. All of the representatives are there together, and they're in a quiet room where it's just like, not even quiet, but it's in a private room where they're just like, all right, what are we going to do? And the North is like, slavery's terrible. We want it abolished. And the South is like, you're not getting the South. We're not going to be part of you. We're going to be part of you if you say that whatever the main slave trade is, I think it's like transatlantic or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's this big slave trade. They're like, it has to last 20 years.
Yeah.
We can't outlaw it for 20 years. That is a requirement. And then they say, basically, look, we're ashamed of slavery. It's this terrible thing.
The South is saying
Yeah,
this?
the South is
Okay.
like,
Can you use a Southern accent, please?
we're not proud of our slavery, but we need it. And they're like, we will on our own terms free the slaves, all of the southern states. You northerners can go wrap it up as soon as you like. Once we figured out how to economically survive without slaves, we'll get rid of it because slavery's wrong.
That seems crazy.
Yeah, and these are enlightened men from the South who are still representing them, but they're like, obviously there's men in the South who are like, these are not people.
Yeah.
But the people in the South, one thing is they had to agree that they were people because they wanted the 3/5 compromise. So they were like, they're not property, they're people, and that's why we need more votes for them. And they're like, we get it's wrong, but we'll fix it on our own terms. Now, part of that, I'm sure, is just to make the North like them more and, get along better. I'm sure in their own circles they did all sorts of terrible racist things, even worse than that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is they come into public eye later, and people in the North are appalled. They're like, is this deal happening? Like, there's parts of America that don't want an eventual end to racism. Like, even the North understands it's an economic process. But they're like, well, of course we're going to get rid of it eventually. Like, the Constitution should be against slavery. And they're upset because now they're hearing there's almost this agreement where the North feels like, all right, all men are created equal. That means eventually slavery is going to go away. And the South is like, yeah, but we have the 20-year protection on the transatlantic whatever. We feel that there's no guarantee we have to get rid of slavery. They totally view the Constitution differently.
Yeah.
And there's this argument about it. And what I find amazing is, as much as I think there are, to answer the question, a lot of racist founding fathers and a lot of founding fathers who tried to be better and felt like radicals, so I give them a little more slack because they're like, we need to outlaw slavery right away, but we can't. It's like, all right, he's struggling and he doesn't, like, if he did argue to end slavery, he might just have been kicked out of the council for being unable to work with. Like, that state might not be part of the country.
And today, it's like trying to convince a Joe Biden supporter to vote for Trump.
Or a Trump supporter to vote for Joe
it's
Biden.
Literally,
Either
it
way.
is that divisive.
And what I find crazy, too, is somebody like Benjamin Franklin. I gained a lot of respect for him. And I don't know, I'm sure he has all sorts of racist past. But he at one point, there's a member of the South who uses the Bible. And to all of you religious folks out there, I'm sure you disagree as well. He uses the Bible and he says because there are slaves in it, it's okay to have slaves in America.
Mm-hmm.
And Benjamin Franklin, one of the last things he does is he writes like this mock story and he's like, oh, there's this Muslim pirate and he's enslaving all these Christians, but there's slaves in the Bible, so it's okay. And Benjamin Franklin's basically like, you're a dumbass. Like, this is what you sound like to me. And then he dies. That is the last thing he publishes before he dies. I am so proud of that. It's like he goes out on a note of your defense for slavery makes you a dumbass. Mm-hmm. Whereas someone like Thomas Jefferson, I lost respect for.
Yeah.
And I read something where basically he talks about the Native Americans aren't that bad. They're just a symptom of the environment. They're these people who we should probably meet and mate with and get along with and live with and try to have a good relation with. They're in a bad environment, so they're not able to be at the level of the white man. And in that same writing, he talks about slaves' natural inferiority. And we talk about this. What it looks like is he's trying to get people to move west. He's just bought all of West.
Yeah.
And he's like, we need people to settle this so we can pay off all of our war
Before
debt.
he did this, the compass only had three points.
North, south, east.
That was it.
But he basically is telling people Native Americans aren't bad people. They're not racially inferior even. They're just situationally behind us. So that way they'll go live with Native Americans in the West. And in the same writing, he's saying, but we need slaves because they're naturally inferior. So it clearly shows to me someone like Thomas Jefferson, you can't even really assess what his views are because his views were a symptom of his policy. He doesn't seem to care about his effect in terms of racism. He just cares about making the country a better place. And he thinks the way to do that is through slaves and through accepting Native Americans because we need people to settle the West. So he puts two moral opposites into the same paper and just expects you to be okay with it because they both further his view. So it is sad because it does make me wonder how many founding fathers were not only racist in the sense that they didn't work harder to end slavery, but secretly they were just like, well, yeah, you know, who cares? Like, I'm fine. It's not affecting me. And they were like, oh, this policy does help the country. And like, who did the Trail of Tears? It's Jackson or Johnson?
It's Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson is a badass, but he does something like the Trail of Tears. And it's hard because we're met with this cognitive dissonance between wanting to love these men for the great things they do, which in today's society, Obama or Donald Trump aren't going to do as amazing things as someone like Andrew Jackson because there's not that much room for change. You can't... Yeah. Was he the one who paid off all of the debt, or was that Johnson?
Paid off all the debt?
Like all of the bank debt and tried to get rid of the bank because one president pays off all of America's debt.
Well, Andrew Jackson hated the bank, but I don't know.
He pays off... There's one point in history where America has no debt. It's because the president personally pays all of the debt off and gets rid of the banks. And I believe it's Jackson. I always mix him and Johnson up. But I also think Jackson got into duels, and he would just go shoot people.
Yeah.
Like, in that
and
term...
in Louisiana, he's a war hero.
Exactly. In that sense, Obama, Trump, Biden, all will fail to be that mythologically heroic. Yet at the same time, none of them are going to do the Trail of Tears and force Native Americans out of their homes.
So who's
or they're
better?
going to own slaves. And
like, that's the question.
It is hard because naturally you'd say, well, no matter what happens, our current presidents aren't doing the negatives. And that's what's more important. It's easy to see that as more important because it's if you're being fair and you're being equal, it's better for everybody that way. Whereas the things that the badasses of history did really only did benefit mostly white males, sometimes white people if they were good. If they were good, it benefited white people. But it sucks because if we could get that mythos back, where a president did just do these amazing things, and like our president was out on the field as the actual commander-in-chief of a battle, and he was the general of an army.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just like, send troops there, I'll stay home. That, I think, really split off the connection between this person you admire and this person who makes policies. But we can't admire the people who we want to because their policies were so flawed and they caused so much harm. So I think it does create a weird historical difference between if you want to love a president, you have to pick one who you also hate. And people do love our current presidents. I won't say that's untrue, but I think they just do less that everyone can unite under. I think Democrats love Democrats more now, and Republicans love Republicans. And back then, there were a ton of swing voters, because it was like, this guy wants to change the entire country in this way, and this guy wants to change the entire country in this other way.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, well, I think red, and he thinks blue, and everyone's like, I can't do it. It's too much.
It is funny to think that swing voting in itself is so crazy to think about because we like rarely see it anymore, unless like you count like, Pennsylvania doing the big switch and Georgia potentially. I don't know if that was confirmed or yet. I think it has been. But it is sad to see that the United States is almost politically at a standstill. Like if your car had square wheels.
That takes us to our next commercial break for all you cats out there. Have a good time with this one.
I want to go.
Wow, thank goodness my car started moving when I put it into gear.
Howdy!
Oh, Jesus, how did you get in my car?
Don't worry, I was just in the back seat.
That still doesn't really answer my...
Introducing Square Wheels, the wheels for people not on the go.
Wait, that doesn't really make sense.
With Square Wheels, the days of moving are finally over. Stay in traffic all day long with the help of Square Wheels.
I really don't understand the point of this.
Trust me, you can put your car into 20th gear and these puppies still won't move.
20th gear really isn't a thing.
These bad boys will blow your transmission in a heartbeat. So for 99 payments of $99.99, Square Wheels can be yours today. So call now.
Please get out of my car.
Righto.
Even I swear to fucking God, if you don't get out of here, I am going to put your hand in a blender and drink your blood as a smoothie. I cannot stand you. Get out. All right, sorry.
All right, after that,
3, 2. Hey, welcome back.
Wow.
How about them square wheels?
Yeah.
But coming back, I think an interesting topic is I loved doing this podcast so far. I have loved.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's interesting because I want to see in what ways we can genuinely affect our listeners and change their state of mind. I personally was so inspired by the Duncan Trussell podcast to really get on making this. And I feel like that's because his podcasts shape my mind and they really do change my opinions on things and make me think more. So something I wanted to bring up was better communication. Now, as a communications and history major, I've taken a lot of classes that I think everyone should take.
And as an electrical engineering major, I am more than qualified to be a part of this conversation.
And you are, though, because what's interesting is a lot of the times in my comm classes, it was things I already knew. But it's so confusing that it was the first time I heard it from an authority figure. And things like having good relations with people around you and how to do that. You look at the things you're learning and you're like, of course I know this. But when it's really told like, this is important, yes, this matters, this changes your entire life. In school, it's like you need to know math, you need to know science. And if you have good relations, it means you have friends and you're popular. And that's how you learn it. But communications dissects that into saying, we know humans are animals. Here's how to make them like you. And here's how to communicate well. And part of that for me has been viewing my message differently. A lot of the time I think it's easy to think of disagreements, especially. Like, I think that's blue, they think it's purple or whatever. And you're like, well, they're just not listening. They're not hearing me. And there's too much noise. They refuse to listen. And I've reformed my thinking, I hope so, as much as I can, into, well, something's wrong with my message. Something I'm sending is hard for them to take in, and that's why there's a disagreement. It's not that they refuse to listen, because at times it does feel that way. It does feel someone doesn't want to hear what you're saying. But I feel if you go into it with the stance of, how do I change my message so it's easier for them to take in, you can get through to a lot more people. And there's a lot more productivity. And one thing, the most basic thing I want to throw out there to people is bringing up things that are awkward or things that are uncertain. Taboo for sure. I think that makes you closer, but almost more of uncomfortable pauses. I think a lot of the times I'll look at somebody and I'll be like, I wonder if they're thinking this, or I wonder if we're both realizing this. Like, I wonder if this is awkward right now and they're uncomfortable with something, or it's hard to find a good example when you're not in the moment, but
Are you trying to feel like them? Like, are you like, okay, I'm feeling really awkward right now. I wonder if they're feeling awkward, or are you just solely reading them and you're not really thinking about yourself?
I think it can be either. But what I think I realize, the main thing is when there's that awkwardness or when there's that uncomfort or whatever it is, if you bring it up to somebody and you're like, yeah, like, is everything okay? Like, I know there was that weird pause. A lot of the time they'll recognize what you're talking about, even if you don't agree on why it is, or even if you don't agree on how important it is. Sometimes it is just your own mind feeding you things. But if you're just like, yeah, like, I wanted to know what, you thought about this. I know there was that uncomfort between us. Were you uncomfortable with something I said even? Something to that level. I think you can really hear people, and they might just be like, oh, yeah, I was uncomfortable, but I was just thinking about this. Like there was something else totally else on their mind. I think whatever it is, they'll recognize that awkwardness, even if it's not the same awkwardness. And that's what I found fascinating. You pick up on a social cue, and you don't want to bring it up because acknowledging awkwardness cements it. It makes it more real. But if you bring it up, what it's actually doing is expelling it and destroying it because you faced it, and it takes like a second to be like, yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Both people agree it's gone.
It's creating that commonality between the two parties.
And even like you never know what someone's thinking about you. When you're self-conscious about what someone's thinking about you and you think maybe they don't like me because I talk too much, maybe they don't like me because I don't talk enough, any of these things, if you say like, hey, sorry if I was talking too much, I hope it wasn't annoying, they're instantly going to be like, I want this person to feel at ease, and they'll say, no, you don't have to worry about that. And the better your relationship is, the more you can trust them. And the more you can really know that it's not a big deal, because it hardly ever is. We're just suffering from protagonist syndrome, which is this idea that, oh no, I have a zit, the entire school's looking at it. Mm-hmm. When the entire school's like, oh no, I have whatever my own zit is, everyone else is looking at it. And everyone's doing the same thing where they're worried about stuff that no one else is paying attention to. Mm-hmm. Or if they are, no one really cares. Your thought is, oh, I've had a zit before. This person has a zit. That's all. It disappears instantly, and you're back to thinking about the person. So just bringing up things with people, I think, is really important. And even the small things, just talking and improving your communication with somebody will expel those awkward situations almost right away, or get you into a really good conversation that needed to be had. Those are the two results, pretty much.
How do you feel about fake apologies in the sense of, okay, I know I'm not talking too much, but I'm still going to apologize for it anyway to maybe establish that connection that you're talking about, or maybe get us to a better place of understanding?
That's a hard one.
How do you feel about that?
Is there any way you could almost rephrase this so I can understand it better? Just because the reason I have a problem is talking too much is a shared understanding. So it's hard for me to talk and have the other person think I'm talking too much, but feel confident I'm not, because it's such a shared experience, It's something that if they feel I'm talking too much, I'd be more likely to consider maybe I am, because I'll never be in a real situation where someone thinks I'm talking too much and I think I'm not.
Well, we'll go back to my question real quick, but you judge, let's keep going with this example. Do you judge you talking too much based on yourself or based on the other person's vibe expressions?
I do it based on myself.
Okay.
But I don't think there's a situation where somebody honestly, and maybe it's because I have good relations with my friends, it's hard for me to picture a situation where someone was like, you were kind of talking too much. And I would be like, well, I know I'm not. That's wrong. Because it's so hard to have confidence in that and to know it's right or wrong. It's so subjective that I'd be more likely to actually feel some sort of sorrow for it and feel like I should apologize. It's not a big deal, but it would be a legitimate apology.
Okay.
So what's something, if you can think of one that would be like a fake apology, maybe I could relate to better to give an answer?
I don't know. I don't know if I can come up with a great one on the spot.
Okay, I have one, if
Okay.
it works for you. Like, you talk about politics or something, and you know it's okay to talk about politics because making something taboo is dumb, but it made them uncomfortable because they talked about something that could be controversial, and you
Okay.
apologize for bringing it up.
Well, but I feel like we both feel that it's important to bring up this taboo stuff.
Exactly. So if somebody is upset that you brought up something taboo and a fake
Yeah.
apology so
Oh.
they feel better about it is what I'm saying.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I guess since my bias is no, I think we should be talking about this, then yeah, I'll apologize and be like, oh, I didn't mean to cause that argument, or I didn't mean to make you feel that way. And then, I feel like with politics, it's almost a 50-50 shot of them being like, don't talk to me. Or, no, like, I just, their response might be, I just don't think we'll see eye to eye, you know? And so in both cases, I feel like you don't really get anywhere with that person. And not to say that it's not even about trying to convince them that you're right. It's about trying to reach that understanding with people. And I think there are tools that, linguistic tools and that you can use to establish that connection with people. And so I guess my question was like, is fake apologies a useful tool, a tool that should be
Yeah, I
utilized?
definitely get in this situation, I get it a lot more because regardless of if I were proud of it, I think it's easy to imagine myself being like, I'm sorry for bringing that up because it diffuses the situation instantly and you're just kind of moved on. So for me, it's almost how much do I like or care about that person? Because if it's somebody I have a good relationship with, I'll be like, what, we just can't talk about politics and we can't know each other's views and understand them even if we disagree? And that'll make me almost upset. Because if it's somebody I don't know that well and they're like, yeah, can we like not talk about politics? I'll be like, oh, I'm sorry. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, you're useless. You're just a useless person. And maybe that is harsh, but if you can't discuss your opinions without being offended that someone doesn't have your opinion, you're being useless because you're not able to provide your opinion.
Or if you
You're
can't
just
defend it.
Exactly. You're holding
You don't
on
know
to it.
why you're feeling this way. I take issue with that. Like, I'm going to take issue with that.
And there are times I don't know why I'm feeling that way. But even if I were able to say, I know I'm not really sure about it, but here's what I think, and I'm open to hear what you have to say. That's how you build a relationship with somebody. And obviously it's different if you're just on the subway and you're like, hey, like, do you believe in my God? Of course they're just going to be upset, like, don't talk to me about this right now. But if it's somebody you're trying to build a relationship with, and not even like dating, a relationship as two people growing closer, and that's almost everyone in your life you have a relationship with.
Yeah.
It's just strangers you don't. But if they're enabled to talk about their viewpoint and listen to a different viewpoint without being uncomfortable, they're being useless. And I think a lot of us suffer from this because at times it's easy just not to talk about our views and not to think about them, and we grow lazy. But growing lazy means your views are weak. And I think something I've noticed is I've been discussing my views more with people who don't agree with them. And in the past, it would be like, well, who cares? Like, this person's different. It's easy to just be with my friends and they all think alike.
Yeah.
And I feel like my views are right so often that it's like, well, I can't believe they view something that's wrong.
Air
but
quotes.
Wrong.
Yeah.
You can't see my air quotes.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, Sean. But I think as I've grown, I am almost more drawn to conversing with people who are different because Sometimes they are just, well, you're ignorant and they're how I used to be, and they refuse to listen.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad only because I used to be that way, I think, on some level. Even just as a child, everyone is, I'd say.
Sure.
As a child, it's like, well, I want this toy, and they're like, but it's mine. And you're like, well, screw you. Ooh, you're the worst. But
Thanks, Hitler.
honestly, but nowadays, if somebody has a different opinion and I can really explain mine, it's not about them agreeing with mine. It's that them understanding why it's logical for me to have my view, because I'm starting to understand why they have theirs.
Mm-hmm.
I get why you vote one way or vote the other way, and it doesn't have to be the same vote as mine for me to understand that you logically can have a defense for this. And if your defense is, I don't like black people and one candidate seems like they're better for white supremacy, I'm still going to think you're disgusting. It's not like that's a good example. But if your defense is that you have a legitimate value that's tied to one side and you believe in it more than the other value personally, we all need to be open to listening to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially in something like politics, if you write somebody off as, I think to generalize, I think the right has a lot of Klansman voters and the left has a lot of crazy psycho voters as well. And the right views the left as their crazies, the left views the right as their crazies.
Mm-hmm.
And the middle has a hard time getting on stage. They have a hard time projecting their view because it's so not radical. It's so laid back that it's too easy to agree with. It's not going to rally anybody up by being like, both sides kind of have a point. You know, like no one wants to hear that in a debate. They want to sell their side only. And we've lost the point of communication. You can't talk to somebody with a different view. You have to demonize them. Otherwise, your side starts to reject you. You'll be actually ousted from your own party if you suggest that the other side has some sort of reason to them or has some sort of logic behind their vote. And it's sad because even something like primaries is upsetting to me. I'm a middle voter, if you couldn't tell. And I always think politics kind of has failed us currently. But I hate that I can't vote in the primaries because it's saying you might not be a Democrat or a Republican, but you have to register for one party, say you are a part of that party, if you want to vote in the primaries.
Yeah.
And if you like the other candidate, you have to vote against your own party. That's what it's saying. It's not you're voting for somebody's ideas that you like more. It's you're voting against your own party, which is why it's so hard for people to swing. They're like, well, I have to vote for my party. This is my values.
Yeah.
If you didn't give them those parties and said you can just vote in the primaries, and you could only vote for one primary candidate, though. That's how I think it would be hard because there's still cross-voting and people trying to vote for bad candidates. But I think we could trust, hopefully, the population to vote for whatever, quotes, the best candidate in each primary is. And then it's all of these people without parties listening to ideas. But now it's these people with parties who tune into either the Republican or Democratic primary debates, and they hear all of these candidates telling them the same ideas. So by the time the real debate happens, you know one candidate. And everything the other one says sounds dumb because everyone sounds dumb at the actual debates between different parties. They always fail to really go into their point. They're just trying to sell themselves rather than give good political backing.
Yeah. The debates have really become just entertainment at this point. It's not even about policies. And all you poli-sci majors will be like, no, they're arguing real policy. They're not.
Throwing shots at poli-sci majors right now.
Yeah, they're not. They're giving them lob questions, and it's not even worthwhile watching when you know the answer to every question as the viewer. So if they're like Dawson Gerke running for the Bull Moose Party, how do you feel about killing bulls and how do you feel about killing mooses?
And I'm like, I like hunting. And it's like, well, I got the hunting vote.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're really saying.
Yeah, and if I'm a hunter, I already know that Dawson Gerke is going to like hunting.
I'm just waiting to make sure he doesn't say I don't like hunting.
Exactly.
That's why I'm tuned in.
So, exactly, and that's not why you should be tuned in. You should be tuned in for them to say something that you didn't expect, whether it be your candidate or the candidate that you didn't, think you were going to like. Like, it's just not worth it when okay, the Democrat, well, he's just going to give Democratic ideals, and the Republican, he's just going to talk about Republican ideals. I can just go on Google and look up 2 lists and know exactly what they're going to say before they even say it. There's no surprise. There's nothing in there that's going to make me think.
Here's the problem, though. What's even more astounding is going on Google and looking up a party's ideals puts you in a separate pool of voters. Because if you're listening to the primaries and even the debates, you're getting like half of your party's policies max. And half of what you're getting is, here's everything the other party has done wrong. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to see them as legitimate because you've heard all of these terrible things for the last years about the other party that you're like, well, they're just psychos. And you refuse to have that gap be like, well, both teams suck right now. Both are terrible. And maybe there is a lesser of 2 evils, and that's the people's decision on what they think it is. But it shouldn't be 2 evils. And it goes back to what you told us about you shouldn't have to look for the truth. What's sad is if they're like, what's our healthcare plan? One side's going to be like, we have the current healthcare plan. And one side's going to be like, we have a better one. We're going to reform it. And it's too much money. Neither of them are really going to look at you and say, all right, guys, today I'm going to explain what our healthcare plan is, what it means, how it's affecting the entire country, where it's bad, especially. No candidate's going to say, here's where our party is harming the country.
No.
They're only going to say, here's the positives. And then the other side's going to say, but what about the negatives? And they'll say, I don't care because you have negatives too.
Yeah.
We don't acknowledge our own faults. We don't acknowledge our own positives. We're just saying, I'm good, and they're saying, I'm good for different reasons. And you're bad, and you are bad for different reasons. If we forced our candidates to sit down and give us a comprehensive explanation of their policies
they couldn't
and
do
why
it.
they stand behind them, our candidates likely couldn't even do it. They just aren't being paid to make sure they don't speak out against this policy.
Yeah.
So I really wish that maybe when I'm an adult, things get better, because right now we're at a situation where we feel like I feel trapped between we've made so much progress. Our candidates know that you can't have slaves, and they know slavery's wrong. But
really made
I know,
so much
but
progress.
It's like we've lost
Only
the conversation of the
hundreds
olden
of
days.
years.
Back then, it would be the same thing. It'd be like, look, I can't remember who it was, but there's the story. I think it was Jefferson, maybe, who was like, my opponent John Adams is dead.
Yeah.
It's like, that is the greatest selling point I've ever heard. If you convince people that John Adams is dead, you win. You just win. That's a baller move. But we've kind of exemplified that into just opponent bad, and we kept doing that. I think at least back then you had to talk about what you were running for because things were changing so rapidly. Mm-hmm. And now we're trying to halt change to a slow pace so no one's upset.
Do you think, though, that it's impossible for candidates to talk, So, I mean, healthcare itself, we'll use this example. There's a lot that goes into figuring out the nation's healthcare. And we talked about this a little bit. Like, it would be impossible, not impossible. It would be extremely difficult to just make, Medicare just government controlled, like to make hospitals not private. There's so much that goes into it that we don't even know, So do you think it's impossible for these candidates to talk about the details when the general public, ourselves included, wouldn't understand what the hell they're talking about?
I think that's a fair assessment. I think what's important is that they try to explain things in layman's terms, and we do need good speakers and communicators on the podium. And it's almost like they have to go undercover. They have to be double agents. So I kind of think of the current Pope as going undercover because he's in office and he was just like, hey, guys, gay people rule. I love them. And everyone was like, whoa, like what? And he was like, yeah, I mean, I stood in the church all this time. I listened to their sayings. And I was like, yeah, gay people are okay. I'm just going to deal with it. And then he got into office as Pope and he was like, gay people are okay. It's canon. He sat through all the bullshit.
Catholic canon.
Catholic canon. It is. He did make Catholic canon. And I think it's Christian canon, right, technically?
Well, no, he's
only Catholic. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, he made Catholic canon. And he sat through all the people who were like, we need to cast out homosexuality, especially thinking about when this man was a boy in church, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It was clearly much worse.
Yeah.
And
He's seen some shit. I don't
He
know if
has.
you've looked at his story.
I haven't looked at his story.
He's seen some shit.
But I want to say that the president, we need a president who sits through all the bullshit, who tells you everything, policy, is likable enough to get in. And then once he's in office, he just says, all right, I'm going to start explaining what my party is to everybody. And he just goes out and tries to unite people under knowledge, at the least. He's like, here's all of the flaws with our party and things we need to change that we haven't been addressing. Here's all the secrets that, maybe not all of the secrets, like you can't give out everything the government knows, but here's the things that the people should know that we still just don't, and build greater trust. And he needs to be like, here is what we're trying to achieve and what's important to our party's values, and here's why we disagree fundamentally with the other party. And then he needs to say, how do we work together? And he needs to get people discussing.
He or she.
He or she, to be fair. I'm curious, and it's almost like I think it can't be a woman, because what we're asking them to do is so impressive. It would be dangerous to have a woman as your candidate who's going undercover for the sole sake that the American people might be less likely to elect them because that's a
Right
woman.
now. I feel like when we're older, it's
True,
totally doable.
especially one party might enjoy a woman president more than the other. And I think it depends which side they run on too. And we don't know what politics are going to be like. But I think if you were to say this next election, we're going to pick a woman as our candidate, you would be more likely to lose because you picked a woman. And maybe I'm wrong, but it's just, I think inherent sexism exists, and there's no one who's really sexist toward, I guess there are people who are sexist towards men, but I
Definitely.
think you're not going to say I refuse to vote for him because he's a man, because it's so understood they've been men all of this time.
There definitely was a small percentage of voters in the last election, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. I mean, there's crazies. There's always crazies. So there's definitely at least a certain number of people that were like, oh, Hillary Clinton's a woman. I'm going to vote for her.
And here's the thing. I almost want that to happen for the sole sake of this first woman president means that the next time a woman runs, it's not going to be, we need a woman president. It's going to be,
And we saw that
here's
with
her
this.
policy, here's his policy. And yeah, we have the first
Kamala
woman
Harris.
vice president and a bunch of other firsts for her. And I think what's sad is that she's going to be rewarded for being the first rather than being good or bad, rather than her actual merit.
Sure.
But I think what's good is the next time we have a woman vice president candidate, people aren't going to say, we need to get a woman in this spot. They're going to say, we've had one. And they're going to be slightly more, at least, willing to look at how actually good they are at filling the position, because they're no longer a first, and they're no longer a symbol of American progression.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard
That's
because
fair.
we can totally have a woman who's a good enough candidate to make it to be the best president. But I feel like the first woman isn't going to be. It's going to be a staple of we're progressive. And it's because we have such bad candidates currently. If we had like really high tier candidates right now, I think that would make it so we could
S-tier
have,
candidates.
if we had S tier, I think we have like some C tiers at highest on the podium. But
Not meta.
honestly, we're out of meta. If we had like a president meme up on stage, let me tell you, a woman president could slap cheeks. She could go up there and just be like, let's get this country into shape.
Yeah.
But a man president or a woman president aren't going to do that right now, which is why I think we might elect a woman because woman rather than because good, because neither candidate's going to be good.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping, like you said, when we're older, we don't really know. I hope by that age, we start just getting more, getting more needy with our candidates and desiring better from them.
Yeah, I think I always like to be optimistic in thinking that we are in a more enlightened generation. And younger kids scare me sometimes. I don't understand Fortnite, but just seeing...
I love Fortnite for all of you out there.
No, but just seeing like the Black Lives Matter movement and how there are older and younger generations, but I feel like younger generations have really dominated that movement and have really pushed that movement. And when we saw like anti-gun movements, when like school shootings were on a serious rise in the United States, like that was led by teenagers too. That's a good feeling as a teenager to see that stuff. Like,
I'm an
wow,
old man these days.
yeah, I feel like seeing somebody who's my age or younger in front of this crowd leading change for something better, that's nice to see. I don't see too many like 80-year-old white people, saying we need change. That's
Hey,
like hardly ever
that's why
happening.
people loved Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that's
Yeah.
also why people love Betty White.
Yeah,
They were just a couple of badass old women who were like, yeah, I'm doing my part.
yeah. I just think the overwhelming majority of those leading these movements are on the younger side, and that's just nice to see.
It is nice to see, but it's also, I think, worrisome because the old generation's like, well, you're young, your opinion doesn't matter. And the young generation their opinion matters, but I think sometimes they're uninformed. And one thing that
Yeah.
I find, it creates turmoil within me, to say the least, is people promoting the Black Lives Matter movement as one of, like, probably the greatest civil rights movement in history I've seen. And to me, it's like, well, what about the time when there was a war over slavery and then we'd won and we're like, you can't have slaves? Or what about the time that Martin Luther King was like, I have a dream, let's end segregation? You're trying to end a lesser problem that is still a huge problem. But it's hard for the Black Lives Matter movement to match up only because of how amazing historical civil rights movements are. So it's either that they don't know what they're comparing themselves to, or that they just want to add relevance to their cause for the sake of it'll be more successful. And I get that it's a huge thing going on, but they were actual definitively like successful, straight up country dominating, changing movements in civil rights. And while Black Lives Matter is reaching that, it's not making a change to the degree of ending segregation.
No, I mean, this is tough. I don't know if we're the ones to speak on this, but I mean, inherent racism, you don't think that's like inherent and systematic racism, same thing. You don't think that's easier to overcome than something that's, something as out there as like, here's a white water fountain and here's a black water
You're
fountain.
saying
I think there's an argument to be made that that's easier to fix because I'm able to see that.
so
I'm
you're
able
saying
to
like segregation's easier than inherent.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made there. I'm not going to say whether one's easier or not, but I think there is an argument to be made that they're trying to fix something that is so mental, is so systematic. Like it's a hidden enemy, and they're trying to fight that. And I think there is merit to that. I don't think it's fair to say one's better than the other. One did more than the other.
To me, it's almost like, and maybe
all
this
good.
is just ignorant from. It is all good, and I guess what I just have a problem is the promotion of it as the greatest movement.
Sure.
That's what got me thinking about it. It's
But
not like I
social
was sitting at
media
home
is-
like, oh, that darn civil rights. Like, no, I'm not. I live above the border, but yeah. So basically, it's like, to me, it feels like they're taking the Cold War and they're saying this was the greatest war of all time. Now, sure, the world didn't blow up. It could have blown up, but there's no battle. It's hidden warfare. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
Okay.
So we're doing hidden warfare right now, and I feel like it's important. It's not even, but I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it is less important because you're not going to end systemic racism if you have different water fountains, and you're not going to end systemic racism while they're slaves. And I think so much has been done in the past that this is almost like, if what's it after an earthquake? Like an aftershock, is it? A tremor or something?
There is
There's a
name.
term, whatever that is.
We don't have earthquakes.
Yeah, we don't. Earth is flat, so there's no quake. But I think, I think it's hard because it's a positive change occurring, but to me, maybe it is just because I'm white and I'm so detached. I feel like ending systemic racism is important. Ending segregation is more important because I feel like it's almost a process. You know, you could
Yeah.
not end systemic racism while segregation exists.
Yes, that is true. I think it is steps on a ladder, all going towards a positive outcome.
So does the top of the ladder matter more than the bottom?
And I don't know.
Because
I
I feel
don't
like the
know.
bottom matters more. And it's hard because how are you going to get on
Sure.
the ladder if you don't have the bottom?
Sure.
You know,
Okay.
like at least you got somewhere.
Yeah, I do. I accept that analogy. I think it's not up to us. I think it's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
I do. And
For those of you at home who don't know who we are and can't tell by the description or picture, we're white.
yeah, we both had it fairly easy, in those regards. So yeah, I think the bottom line is it's not up to us to figure out, but I think it's all for the better, and I like that it's happening.
And do you think, I know this has been a pretty charged episode. I'm throwing a lot of these at you.
Yeah.
Do you think that there needs to be violence in order for there to be progress right now? Do you think we're at a place where we're peaceful? Like, do you think Gandhi could solve the issues we're having? Or do you think we need a more American approach of just breaking shit and going crazy until someone listens?
It's tough. I think my immediate answer is there needs to be a way to make a statement. Posting, I'm going to say it. Posting a picture on social media is not changing the world. It's not. And I hope our listeners could accept that.
If you don't, please leave a comment.
Yeah.
It'll give us something to talk about.
It is, obviously share your opinions and, speak up for what's right. That's obviously important. But you can't just post a picture on social media one day and then the next day not even think about your post or not even go out and protest. Like, you didn't do anything. I'm sorry. So violence and these riots and burning cop cars and whatever, like, is that the best way to do it? Probably not. My siblings own a small business. I feel for small business owners seeing something that they've worked for destroyed for something that they had no part in. That breaks my heart, and that's wrong. And obviously, like, my neighbor's a police officer. Like, I wouldn't want to see him harmed because I know he's not a bigot. I know he's not in that percentage of cops who hate black people. Like, that's not him. And so that would hurt me to see that he would be hurt, from something like this. But are we talking about it because they did it? Yeah. Like, all these riots got the nation looking. All these riots got Trump to be angry. You got a reaction out of him. That's kind of what we needed to start this conversation. Like, it is so tricky, and I don't think there's a right answer. I would hope that there's another way to do it, but I think, is it kind of working? Are riots kind of working right now? Yeah, the sad answer is yeah, I think it is.
I think what sucks is there's a wrong answer, especially. And you talked about that social media post. I personally have considered it tone deaf because so much of the time it's like, black people are good, and they're posting this to everyone on their timeline as the same thing posted. So what I'm seeing is an echo chamber of, here's my view, all of you must agree with it, and they all do already.
Oh my God.
So
when people are like, unfollow me if you disagree, no, you need a conversation. You need the conversation.
That's why I'm so frustrated by the social media, because my approach has always been to start interpersonal conversations, and I'll reach out to some people I know who put these posts up, and it's not like I'm disagreeing with something as blanket as racism. Obviously, racism's terrible, and obviously the people who are racist are terrible, and there's an internal racism that's hard to decipher. But when there's something like, when there's something controversial that does genuinely have both sides on it, and is a genuine conversation, I don't want to bring up any examples because I don't want to pick a bad one just because it would be harmful. And so if there's a good example of this and you hit them up, sometimes they'll be almost indignant to talking about it. Like, they're not ready for the conversation. They're like, what do you mean you're saying something that's not what I think exactly?
Yeah.
They're like, that makes you a bad person. And it's like, don't you see the whole point is starting a conversation, and you have to be willing to listen as well as to speak.
Yeah.
And 90% of what you're saying, everyone you know agrees with. The 10% that is subject to actual conversation, you refuse to talk about. So what are you doing? What change are you making if all you're doing is saying, here are the easy things that we know need to change and we know we can accept, and no one talks about it. And then you're like, here's something that is iffy and does have repercussions both ways, and I refuse to talk about it because it's just, well, you should agree with me because I feel like I'm being a good person.
Yeah. It's sad. It is sad. I saw these posts on my timeline from people that I kind of wouldn't expect to see these kinds of posts from. And it's like, dang, you really feel like that? You really think like that? You think that not having a conversation is the better option than having a conversation? Like, I'm in the mindset where you don't have to change their minds. It would be nice, but you can't do it unless you start talking to them. You can't. You can't just be like, unfollow me, because they're still going to be a dumbass, and you didn't help them. You didn't change them. You didn't show them your views. Like, if you're on social media and you're posting all this informative stuff about atrocities that are happening in the United States, but then you want the people who need to see this to unfollow you? What are you accomplishing? What is the point of that?
And I do wonder who sees this 90% and is like, geez, you like equality? I gotta unfollow. Like, the real easy things are what they're always like, unfollow if you disagree. Yeah. And it's like, who are you following that lives in the Klan headquarters? Like, where are these people in your timeline?
Yeah.
And what's hard is, I think, exactly. Right. I think as a caller, I've kind of gotten this idea where I worked as a student caller for a bit. So you'd call people and you'd say, hello, would you like to give money? And they say, no, like, leave me alone. And you're like, well, what about this lower amount of money? And they tell us, just do all of your ask. You have a certain amount of ask. If they're upset, they're going to hang up. Mm-hmm. You know, like, we don't lose anything by them hanging up. We're just asking the amount of times we have to. And obviously there are situations where you don't. But it is like, our goal is to raise funds. You ask this amount of times. If they don't want to hear it, they hang up. If somebody hits you up and they are providing something racist or something negative, or even something that you're just too tone deaf to see, because I do want to hone in on the fact that when I open these conversations, I feel like it is only on the really subjective things, because 90% of the Black Lives Matter movement you agree with inherently if you're a good person, I think.
More than,
because it is just trying to end systemic racism. But I think these people, they get these messages in and they're like, well, I don't want to go into it. And it's like, so how did you open the door just to say I don't want to dive in? Don't let them hang up. Talk about how they're being bigoted if that's what you really feel. Mm-hmm. If you feel they're a bad person for their beliefs, maybe don't say it that way, but talk about here's what's problematic with your ideas. And let them say, well, this is nonsense, and go away and unfollow you. Don't tell them, unfollow me. Let them unfollow you because they disagree with the ideas you discussed, not because you don't want to discuss your ideas with them.
Mm-hmm. And be aware of, don't be afraid of people disagreeing with you, and have those tough conversations. It's absolutely worth it. And if you really push people away based on who they support, and we all know that there are bad people out there that people are supporting. No names. Like, your gut reaction shouldn't be to let them keep doing that. Your gut reaction should be to insert yourself in those difficult scenarios and talk with them and start that conversation. Don't, as you said, don't hang up the phone. Let them hang up the phone.
So I think we are coming towards the end.
We're at an hour of 20 minutes right now.
All right, I figured we were somewhere near there.
Yeah.
So I want to throw out our ending ideas. So we're probably going to get back to our original comment challenge. So just again, this week, if you have anything you want to hear us talk about, leave it in the comments. That's for all you folks at home, all you lovely doodaddies.
All our listeners.
Oh my God,
our
there's too many to
adoring
keep up
fans.
with, so we won't get to all of you. But yeah, so again, Yep.
Remember, if your name rhymes with Schwan McGee, do not comment. We're not interested. We're hanging up the phone on all people named Schwan McGee.
do you have anything for something Sean likes you'd like to throw out?
Some Sean Rex. I honestly, I did not come with one today. I guess I talked about it a little bit. Corridor Digital, they Corridor Crew even. They just have some really informative, some visual effects stuff, some animated stuff, stuntmen, like just a bunch of information about film. Highly recommend. I learned a lot from watching them.
And if you're interested in investing in stocks, once again, my Robinhood link is down there below. Set up your bank account.
Robinhood.
We'll both get a free stock. It's pretty baller. If you are struggling as a victim of any sort of racial or sexist prejudice, you can always donate to our podcast, two white guys who are talking about life from their perspective. Just an idea. And then not to mix them in with my joke here, but we do have a friend. His name is Jack Delamater. He makes amazing music. He will be our song of the week. You know the title of the song again that we picked.
Yes, I do know that.
So we are going to look up our brain.
No, Passing of the Seasons.
Passings of the Seasons. So we're actually, we talked to him. He's a great guy. Well, we love him. He gave us permission to use it as an outro for this episode. So if you tune in for a little bit longer, you'll hear music by Jack Delamater. Go look him up on Spotify. Jack, I don't exactly know how to spell the last name. I think
it's phonetic. Delamater. Passing of the Seasons is on his album Wild Wisdom. And on this song, our friend Natalie Dow performs the piano solo on it. So shout out to her as well.
Good to know. I love Invisible Lines, so go check that out, and we'll catch all of you guys.
Down with the shadows that victimize the past. It's the passing of the seasons. It's the moments that will last. It's the passing of the seasons. It's the feelings that you've